Hi, everybody. I see we already have a couple of people in here. Great. So if you are normally in here, we normally wait till about 5 after before we get started. For anyone there that is new out there in Facebook or Twitter or YouTube land, my name is Mother Della Mort, and I am your host, and this is the Horror Gallery. We discuss anything from cryptids to unsolved crime to just any kind of high strangeness that you can imagine. I do like to reach for the obscure things that you may not hear all the time. And we do have a really interesting one for you tonight. This is part two of Into Thin Air. If you did not see part one, I do recommend that you go back and watch it, but we are going to do just a very, very short recap so that way, if you have not, you're not completely lost. So, let's see who we have in here. Again, we normally wait till about 5 after, so go ahead and lock your doors and turn out your lights and get ready for a good show. And I have something great to announce. I am not losing my eyeballs. I figured out what was wrong, and silly me had the brightness turned way down on the phone, and it was very, very hard to see anything. I can see you guys tonight. Hi, Raven. How are you? So glad you're in here. There's Raven. All right. And look, the easiest and best thing that you guys can do, and it's absolutely free, is if you enjoy our content, please share. That is the best thing that supporters can do for their content artists is just to share their material to people that you think may like what we discuss and what we do and our complete shenanigans sometimes. Also, if you have not heard, we do now have a patron. So this will be one of the expanded episodes that you'll be able to access over there at our cohort tier, which is the $5 tier. With that tier, you're going to get expanded episodes, which what that means is I have a lot more information that I will be sharing with you guys in Patreon. So it's more of a little bit deeper dive, but we still have a lot to cover tonight. I did not realize how much we had to cover until I started putting all my research together. So I think what we're going to do tonight, now that I can see the chats again, is once I go through like a section, because we're going to be talking about each one of these hikers that had disappeared. So once I finish that section, then what I'll do is I'll get to the comments. That way we can kind of drill down and really get to everything that we need to get to because it's probably going to be a little bit of a long episode. Um, but yeah, we've got some interesting. I think you'll find this very interesting. And if you are a armchair detective or sleuth or really do like mysterious circumstances, uh, put on your cap tonight because uh, these are unusual. And again, we're going to go mostly tonight. We were going to cover really what happened and some of the theories as to what could have happened to these three through hikers. So um, looks like we've got Kisa here, and she says, "Hi, Odd Mama, and hello, everybody." Hello, hello, hello. So glad you're here. And I did announce I did not lose my eyeballs last week. I just did not have the brightness turned up high enough. So I couldn't see anything. So guys, it looks like it's about 5 after. It looks like the notifications, at least on Facebook and YouTube went out. I'm sure Twitch and all the others did as well. So go ahead, settle in. Let's get started. And if you've got any ideas, if you've got any questions, if you've got anything you're not clear about, put it down in the comments. And once I finish up each one of these sections, we'll get to that and kind of discuss it a little bit before we move on. So let's go ahead and get started and share, 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 guys. Please share. That really helps us out a lot and helps us beat the algorithm. So now, while gathering information for a subject profile, The investigator develops a deeper understanding of the missing individual. And, at least in theory, this helps us predict their behavior so that we can best determine where to search for them. While researching for other missing hiker cases for clues that might help me find Chris, and she's talking about Chris Silva, two disappearances grabbed my attention: Chris Fowler and David O'Sullivan, the other men who had vanished from the Pacific Coast Trail shortly after Chris Silva did. As I dove into these reports of their last known whereabouts, the mysterious circumstances surrounding their cases took hold of me. That's Andrea Langford, by and author of Trail of the Lost: The Relentless Search to Bring Home the Missing Hikers of the Pacific Crest Trail. And I really, really do, if you find this subject matter interesting, I really, you really should check out her book. It was just past fall. It was on the best-selling list. So, she's just she's a really, really good writer. It's gonna really keep your attention. So again, we're gonna do a little bit of a recap for those that did not catch part one, but I'm gonna keep those just really simple. Now, on the evening of April 6th of 2017, David O'Sullivan, a 25-year-old individual, dispatched an email to his family in Ireland from the mountainous town of Idlewild, situated in Riverside County. Now, the next morning, David disappeared without a trace. David O'Sullivan had initiated his trek along the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail at its southern terminus, which is in Campo on the Mexican border. This occurred on March 22nd of 2017. As a recent college graduate, he had been employed in Ireland for a year to amass sufficient funds to pursue his dream of traveling the scenic trail up to the Canadian border. So it's very much like the Appalachian Trail. It's just out west. It's a path taken by numerous individuals before him. In his final correspondence, David expressed his excitement about resuming his journey on the Pacific Crest Trail the following day. The year 2017 was marked by uncommon weather patterns on the San Jacinto Mountains, with an unusually high amount of snowfall for such an early stage of the season. There are several trails leading up the mountain, with the Devil's Slide being the most popular. Nevertheless, a day prior to O'Sullivan's last sighting, a hiker reported advancing a mile into the trail before encountering snow and deciding to retrace their steps. Despite lacking experience in alpine environments, David had informed other hikers of his intention not to hike through the snow and had not acquired any snow equipment prior to embarking on this next section of his journey. However, he did make a purchase of $70 at the local outdoor store, Nomad, but the item was not recorded at their point of sale. According to the store, all their snow equipment would have been registered. O'Sullivan was also utilizing a half-mile map. It's a brand specifically engineered for the Pacific Crest Trail. The map advised hikers to take Black Mountain Road when snow was present to bypass the most hazardous sections of the terrain. And there's one section on the San Jacinto Mountains that is extremely treacherous during certain times of the year because of snow and ice, and it's very steep. And guys, I'm going to get to the comments just as soon as, because we've got a lot to unpack here. As soon as I kind of finish sections, we'll get to you guys. So just hang tight. And if you've got any questions, please, please, please throw them in there in the chats. All right. And no one knows which of the many possible routes David O'Sullivan planned to take from Idlewild back to the Pacific Crest Trail, or how far he may have gotten. David O'Sullivan was one of almost 4,000 people who got permits for the Pacific Crest Trail Association to hike en route in 2017. And we discussed this a little bit in part two about how they do kind of a lottery system. And there is some concern as to the safety of hikers as to how they do this. And you'll understand that here in just a minute. The association is a nonprofit that helps maintain the trail, provides information, and issues long distance permits, but it does not keep track of hikers along the way or take any type of responsibility for their safety. David was not an athlete, and as per his mother's account, but he did possess a black belt in karate and enjoyed hiking and cycling. So he wasn't. I mean, he was. He may not have been considered like a professional athlete, but he he was athletic. Okay, but just not really acclimated with probably the terrain that he was getting ready to embark on. Now, prior to embarking on the Pacific Crest Trail, O'Sullivan worked at a gas station for approximately a year to accumulate the necessary funds. His parents were taken aback and not entirely thrilled when he disclosed his intentions in late of 2016. By that point, he had already undertaken extensive research and initiated physical preparation. However, the mountains in Ireland bear very little resemblance to those in the US. The Irish peaks reach up to 3,000 feet, a mere fraction of what the Pacific Coast Trail's lofty elevations reach, and snow cover is usually very infrequent. Consequently, David lacked the opportunity to train with equipment such as crampons or microspikes, and we talked about a little bit about those in part one, which enhances shoe traction. Nor did he have experience with ice axes, which can prevent a downhill slide. Regrettably, when O'Sullivan submitted his application for the PCT permit, he was assigned an early season start date of March 22nd of 2017. Now, to mitigate the ecological impact of numerous hikers, each individual is allocated a start date, with a maximum of 50 permitted to initiate their journey from the trail's southern terminus daily. So only up to 50 people can start on any one given day. However, mid-April to early May is generally deemed the optimal time to commence, the ideal period when there is a heightened probability of encountering mountains with minimal snow and deserts with moderate temperatures. There's been a lot of rain lately, David wrote in an email to his dad a week into his hike. It broke a drought the area has had for years. All the desert flowers are in bloom. I can often smell their perfume-like aroma as I hike. Most of the place is covered in green, and there are streams everywhere for the first few days. It is a weird time to be in Southern California. It's not unusually like this. So he was aware that the weather was a little odd, a little different than what he had uh, researched into. He knew that the Sierra Nevada had received heavy snowfall and that he wasn't equipped for it. He planned a strategy that thru hikers call flip-flopping. And again, we talked about that a little bit in part one. Now, flip-flopping is skipping over the Sierra portion of the trail initially, then returning later when enough ice and snow had melted for him to, hike safely through that area. Now, the San Jacinto Mountains can't compare to the Sierra, but the conditions were dangerous enough. Up to 3 feet of snow still covered parts of the PCT by the time O'Sullivan came through. According to San Jacinto Mountain Trail report written by John King, who is an Idlewild man who estimates he hikes about 5,000 miles per year in the local mountains and runs a website that describes current conditions. King's post for March 30th of 2017, and I'm going to give you his post for March and his post for April, and you're going to see that there wasn't a whole lot of difference in some instances, but I'm going to go ahead and read that. All right, so King's Post for March 30th, 2017 recommended using micro spikes or crampons for traction and poles or ice axes for support. By April 11th, some snow had melted, but King wrote, many PCT trail posts above 8,000 feet remain hidden under snowdrifts, making navigation somewhat difficult. And now the actual report is overview. In general, 2 to 3 feet of snow above 8,000. Although depths are although depths vary greatly depending on aspect and drifting. Many trails above 7,500 feet are not predominantly south facing, require some sort of traction. In other words, micro spikes or crampons. Best combined with support, which would be hiking poles or ice axes. Spikes and poles are especially useful in the morning when the snow is hard and icy. Although crampons are not strictly essential on any trails, they are helpful on steeper terrain. An ice axe is helpful in many locations. Water is available everywhere. The Pacific Crest Trail in general. Snow along almost entire trail from Saddle Junction to Fuller Ridge. And Fuller Ridge is really the dangerous spot, to Fuller Ridge Campground. In many areas, snow is 1 to 3 feet deep with deeper drifts. Largely clear around Strawberry Cienega and Strawberry Junction. Many clear sections on Angel's Glide, which is Saddle Junction north to 9,000 feet crest. Note that almost all of the PCT trail posts above 8,000 feet and some junction signs are completely hidden under snowdrifts, making navigation difficult. Fuller Ridge, hike with crampons and ice axe on 29th of March, is almost completely under 2 to 3 feet of snow. A few very short sections are now visible at the lower northern end at 7,700 feet. There are reasonable tracks to follow at the northern end of the trail, but these are of no use to hikers approaching from the south. While Fuller Ridge is just about passable with spikes and poles in the afternoon when the snow is a little softer, this is extremely risky. I recommend that PCTers do not attempt Fuller Ridge Trail at this time without ice axes, crampons, and a good knowledge of how to use them. This situation is unlikely to change before late April at the earliest. The alternate route is to hike up the Black Mountain Road for 8 miles, where you will reach the Pacific Crest Trail and descend from there 17 miles to Snow Creek. The Black Mountain Road is completely clear of snow for the 5 miles to its crest, and then there are a few small flat snow patches that are easily crossed until you get to the Pacific Coast Trail. Please do not attempt to hike from Idlewild via the highway to Black Mountain Road. Highway 243 is narrow, winding mountain road with no shoulder and vehicles moving at a highway speed. The Southern Ridge Trail, clear, no spikes needed. The trail from Tanskowitz Peak to Chippewapan Flat, the Pacific Coast Trail junction, is currently impassable without ice axe and crampons, and even then it is extremely treacherous. Devil's Slide, largely clear. Although it is possible to reach Saddle Junction without spikes, some hikers will prefer to use them for the uppermost 0.5 to 1 mile distance. The San Jacinto Peak Trails. From Annie's Junction to Wellman's Divide, there are confusing tracks through the snow which do not closely follow the trail. From Wellman's Divide to about 10,000 feet, there are good tracks to follow, but thereafter there are many confusing tracks, few of which follow the approximate route of the trail. So it sounds to me like Animal Trail. Deer Springs Trail above Fuller Ridge, turning has several useful sets of tracks to follow to Little Round Valley, but you have to get past Fuller Ridge first, is the way I'm reading this. Despite traversing 1 to 3 inches of snow, or 3 feet, I'm sorry, of snow in most places, there is no clear track from Little Round Valley to San Jacinto Peak. Marion Mountain Trail. Now, Marion Mountain Trail, largely clear around the trailhead and campground, but the entire trail is under snow from a few inches near trailhead to 1 to 2 feet at junction with Deer Springs Trail at 8,700 feet. There are good tracks to follow that approximate the route of the entire trail, however. But from what I understand, Marion Trail, it's kind of what Appalachian hikers would refer to as like a blue blaze, to where it's kind of like another place you can go, but it's not necessarily part of the Pacific Coast Trail. It's kind of like taking a side vacation or a side trip. And if someone became lost, to me, either they get themselves in a position to where they were able to follow a trail and now they are somewhat boxed in and they're lost, or because Mr. King has already said that most of these trails are just, it's really, really hard to navigate, would make sense to me that someone that is lost would probably, if they didn't wind up following a game trail of some sort, would probably go out towards Marion Mountain Trail. But now that's just me. That's just, from reading this stuff. Now, at least 4 other hikers had to be rescued that March and April, according to the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit, a volunteer group that often assists the local sheriff's department. One was a PCT hiker who had fallen down the mountain near a campground at the northwest end of Fuller Ridge on March 30th. He lost all his water and his stove in the fall and exhausted himself climbing back to the trail repeatedly, the rescuer wrote. On the way to get him, their own truck got stuck in the snow 3 miles from the trailhead. And I'm just going to go over a little bit of April's. All right, let's see. We'll start at the Pacific Crest Trail. So we know that O'Sullivan left in April. We know March 30th the weather was really, really bad. And this particular one is on April the 11th. So Pacific Crest Trail, snow along parts of trail from Saddle Junction to Fuller Ridge Campground, largely clear from Saddle Junction to 9,000 feet crest, then continuous snow to the state park boundary at Annie's Junction. Clear from near that junction past Strawberry Center Ridge to Strawberry Junction. Snow patches increasingly frequent north from Strawberry Junction, then snow largely continuous 1 to 3 feet deep until Fuller Ridge Trail turning. Many Pacific Coast Trail posts above 8,000 feet still remain hidden under snowdrifts, making navigation somewhat difficult. Fuller Ridge. Fuller Ridge trail is now passable with care. See, let's see, and he's recommending spikes and poles and ice axe still. The sign indicating the turn has now emerged from the deep snow that had been covered, making navigation a bit easier, and he's talking about Fuller Ridge. There is a very good set of tracks to follow, even in the area of heavy snow at the higher southern end of the ridge trail. The trail itself is mostly snow-covered for about 0.1.5 miles, and especially steep and icy around the crossing of the northern fork of San Jacinto River. And that's the really steep part, from what I understand, of Fuller Ridge. Thereafter, largely clear until the trail crosses onto the northern side of the ridge. They're largely snow-covered until the Fuller Ridge campground, with a mix of clear patches near the lowest northern end. Southern Ridge is clear to Tankowitz Peak. Devil's Slide, largely clear, no spikes needed to Saddle Junction. San Jacinto Peak, almost continuous snow, 1 to 2 feet from crest at 9,000 feet. Deer Springs Trail above Fuller Ridge, turning has good set of tracks to follow to Little Round Valley and then on to San Jacinto Peak, despite traversing at least 1 to 3 feet of snow in most places. Very little of the actual trail is exposed and visible. Marion Mountain Trail, clear almost to the top. Spikes are helpful but not essential for the final 0.25 mile nearest to the Deer Springs Trail. Not now, just to be clear, that's not unusual. It's okay, so just to be clear, it's not unusual for people to hike alone when it comes to the Pacific Coast Trail. So you would say, well, why are these people going out there and doing this? And it's just not that unusual. About 2/3 of the people who responded to a survey, and it's on a website that has to do with like a lot of hikers and things like that. In recent blogs, stated most of or 2/3 of them did start solo. For many hikers, one of the appeals of adventure is finding a trail family along the way. Now, O'Sullivan also wrote about how he wasn't covering the distance he had hoped to. Someone he shared a campsite with on his third night, who had hiked in 2 days as far as O'Sullivan had in 3, helped him realize his pack was too heavy. I got my kilos and pounds mixed up when I was measuring, he wrote. The next day, O'Sullivan met someone who worked at a outfitter in the town of Mount Laguna, who helped him pare down his load and sold him a new tent, sleeping pad, and other items that would be lighter than what he purchased in Ireland. And this I quote, "I've been flying ever since," he wrote. "I think I've dropped about 12 pounds of equipment since day one, and I can really feel it." His pace picked up in the 100 miles between Julian and Idlewild. He managed 20 miles in one of those days, but his struggles weren't over. Another hiker who was on the trail at the same time as O'Sullivan and who blogged about his trek described a storm the night of March 31st that unleashed winds so strong they partially collapsed his tent and caused the rain to fall sideways. That same hiker, David Windsor, actually had lunch with David O'Sullivan a few days later in Anaz, at the southern base of the San Jacinto Mountains. They both stopped at the Paradise Valley Cafe, about a mile off the trail, whose burgers, and he's talking about how good the burgers and everything were, to the trail hikers. It's just a really popular spot. Hey, everybody that's coming in, I'm going to get to your comments here in just a minute. And it states, I sat down and talked to a fellow through hiker, Dave from Ireland, Winslow wrote in his blog. Cracked lips and peeling skin attested to his story of losing his sun hat a few days ago. He had worked at a gas station for a long time to save up for this trip. Some people make some serious long-term sacrifices to be out here. Windsor envisioned describing seeing O'Sullivan catching a ride from the cafe to the trail, while Windsor had to walk the mile back, and gave him a tragically ironic nickname, which was Lucky Dave. O'Sullivan incredibly had an incredibly bad sunburn is one thing that stands out in Windsor's memory. Windsor said in an interview, another is how unprepared O'Sullivan actually seemed. I got kind of a general feeling he was kind of getting slapped around by being out on the trail, Windsor said. That's probably why I was trying to push him toward not trying anything he was not prepared for. He felt like O'Sullivan had romanticized the Pacific Coast Trail as a place to escape to. Despite the rough reality, though, he said O'Sullivan's spirits were high. He didn't give any hints he wanted to quit or escape the trail, Windsor said. He wasn't miserable. He said hikers were aware there was still a lot of snow in the San Jacinto Mountains. Online, some who had made it through the portrayed Fuller Ridge, which it's a dangerous section. Some portrayed that area as the deadliest, iciest ridge on the planet, but others were saying it was nothing to worry about. You could do it in tennis shoes, Windsor said. He got the impression that O'Sullivan was going to try to skip some of the snowy sections up there, but he could have changed his mind depending on what he heard in town. The same day, O'Sullivan messaged his friend in Santa Barbara. The plan was to hike about 470 miles further to the Ridgecrest area where the trail transitions from the Mojave Desert to the Sierra Nevada, then catch a bus to Santa Barbara for a weekend visit. He wrote that he thought he'd be there in about 4 weeks. A sequence of intense winter storms brought an end to a protracted 5-year drought, resulting in the accumulation of snow that persisted at depths of up to 3 feet in the San Jacinto Mountains. This occurred during the time when David was traversing the region. Numerous hikers encountered challenges, particularly along, again, that 5-mile segment of the trail on Fuller Ridge. Instances of individuals slipping on ice sheets and undergoing physical demanding injury-prone efforts to regain the trail were reported. Several hikers necessitated rescue during this spring season. At the outset of his journey, O'Sullivan was inadequately prepared. He had not acquired any snow-related training, and as per available knowledge, lacked the appropriate equipment necessary for secure snow hiking. He did not possess a functioning phone, which that was not like abnormal at the time. You've got to think we're talking 2017, and you still had kind of this, from what I gather, this view when you went out on the trail that bringing a cell phone was kind of like not what they consider like a purist view. I mean, if you're going to go on the trail, you need to completely unplug. Now, I would not suggest that. That is not the thought of the day nowadays. But that was not unusual for the time, as far as a lot of these hikers not having phones. They're either not having a phone or having the phone turned off. Plus, I imagine the signal out there probably wasn't the greatest. Now, he did not possess a functioning phone, and his Kindle could only connect through Wi-Fi. Although he had paper maps, he lacked GPS-enabled devices or a rescue beacon that he could have utilized to call for aid during an emergency situation. And that is recommended, to have one of these emergency beacons. David had warned his parents that there might be periods of up to several weeks where he would not be able to get in touch with them, but feeling that, by this point, they were kind of like feeling that something was wrong. Now his parents did contact the Pacific Crest Trail Association in April, and they were told to just basically sit tight and see if David turned up. What they did know, though, at this time is that David had visited at ATM before setting off the mountain in Idlewild, but only withdrew enough to buy more food at his next stop, which would have been Big Bear Lake, about 5 days up the trail from Idlewild. Hang on just a second. All right. Now, a sizable amount was left in his account and had not been touched since that final transaction. Now, there was you're going to read some information. There was some confusion about that because it's going to be July before he is actually reported missing. And I know that sounds like a long time, but just everything, kind of the way everything went, and the fact that he was from out of country, it really hampered the ability to report him missing in an adequate amount of time. So during this time when they contacted, and this is just information that she gives you in the book, and you can find it in some other places. But so when they started getting this weird feeling that they should have heard by David, he should have made it to his next like drop off or like contact point after Idlewild, and they had reached out to the Pacific Crest Trail. They did also get in touch with David's bank in Ireland. And now I guess over there, maybe under the circumstances, the bank was willing to work with them as far as letting them know, what charges had come in and different things like that. And they said that there had been some activity on David's bank account, which at first kind of relieved his parents because they were like, well, good, that means at least something's going on. I mean, like, he's still using his account. But what they later find out, though, is that these were automatic transfers that David had set up prior to leaving for the United States and to hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. So that activity they were picking up on wasn't really him doing anything. It was automatic transfers from, I guess, like his savings into his expenditure account that he was using while he was on the trail. So that kind of, because there is a little bit of difference in the information on that. But he did still have a sizable account that was left in his account and had not been touched since that final transaction once they found out about those automatic transfers. Now, David's mother, Carmel, and father, Con, were becoming increasingly concerned. Then a month later, the friend messaged O'Sullivan, the one that he was supposed to meet in Santa Barbara. And the text goes, "Hey, when should I expect you to arrive here?" The next day, the friend tried again. "Hello." When David failed to appear at the prearranged meeting with the friend in Santa Barbara in May, his family issued a missing persons report. Carmel and Con called the Pacific Crest Trail Association back, only to be told they were not a babysitting service and that they could do nothing. As a result, David was not officially reported missing until June 30th. Well, I said July, but it was June 30th, 12 weeks after he had last been seen. His trail by this point was cold by the time law enforcement officials became involved in July of 2017. Now, a search was launched in Whitewater Preserve, just north of the San Jacinto Mountains, which could have been a route to David's next scheduled stop. Yet, despite using helicopters, dogs, and ATVs, the search and rescue team came up with nothing. The terrain where the group believes David O'Sullivan is most likely to have met trouble is steep and thickly forested and quickly becomes inaccessible when you get off the trail. Drones would be the best way to search, and this was something new that I did not know. Drones would be the best way to search, but the area is designated as a state wilderness where drones are not allowed. And federal rules say pilots have to keep their machines in sight at all times, which wouldn't be possible. Even if the group could get permission, however, the trees and boulders in some areas can obscure objects on the ground. Now, Sergeant Sean Lawler, a Moderna police officer who first took David O'Sullivan's missing person report, also did some investigating and doesn't believe he'd survive. Knowing he was an inexperienced solo hiker and had a good family dynamic, Lawler believes he probably got lost, maybe got dehydrated, and or washed away by a river. And if you remember, the San Jacinto River is down below Fuller Ridge, so that is a possibility. Once word of David Sullivan's disappearance got out, his family received many tips from people who thought they saw him at points north of Idlewild. He was even found a few times, even to the point where the family would ring hostels to speak to him, but none of these sightings were him, is basically what his older brother is stating. Now, several hikers had called in eyewitness statements, thinking they may have seen David at some points on the trail, but none of these sightings have been positively confirmed, with mostly vaguely referring to a hiker with an accent. Now, it has since become known that a German man who was bearing a striking resemblance to David was on the trail during this time, and some people may have confused the two. Riverside County law enforcement concluded searching in October of 2017 when there was very little likelihood of finding him alive. They later told the O'Sullivans that it could be several years or never before their son's remains were discovered in the immense wilderness. Maybe O'Sullivan, who had no experience in those conditions, fell and met a quick end, or was hurt but had no way to call for help. Maybe he got off track and hopelessly lost in the steep forested wilderness. David O'Sullivan wouldn't have been the first Pacific Crest Trail hiker to die in the San Jacinto Mountains, and he wouldn't be the last. Now, in March of 2020, 22-year-old Trevor Laner from Fort Worth, Texas, was killed when he fell 600 feet into a ravine near Apache Peak, about 13 trail miles northwest of Idlewild. The trails were snowy from a series of storms that had rolled through over the previous week. Lawner had been with two other hikers he had befriended along the trail, which is when I refer to a trail family, that would be what you consider trail family. Would just be friends that you make along the way. And they were able to call for help with an emergency GPS device. The risky mission to recover Laner's body and rescue his two friends, and it's just describing it. The winds were so strong that they grounded a helicopter, so searchers had to cut a trail into the steep, hard snow slope to reach them. Was one of the several in just a 2-day span on the trail. So they had to make several several rescues. One hiker slipped and fell in the ice and snow and had to take shelter under a rock through a snowstorm until rescuers could get to him the next day. Another fell 150 feet off the trail and also spent the night lost. Then two from France needed rescue when one fell about 60 feet off the trail and the other got stuck in a section of ice. Any of them could have ended up lost like David O'Sullivan if just a few dominoes had fallen in a different direction. Though they can't be certain, they don't believe David O'Sullivan made it out of the San Jacinto Mountains alive. However, in December of 2017, an aerial survey was conducted over Idlewild. The pilot, Gus Calderon, and a mission specialist, Richard McCready, overflew 88 square miles of mountain face and deep desert, taking over 1,000 photographs of the ground below. Volunteers called squinters, volunteers analyzed those images in detail, looking for signs of David's blue backpack. Gus and Richard, and we're going to go into this a little bit more in the expanded episode, as well as some other cases that this particular group of people helped to find. And it's pretty neat what they're doing, and it's something AI cannot do. An AI cannot work as a squinter. They need human eyeballs in order to analyze these pictures because our brains at birth, pretty much, are already programmed to identify patterns. That's something an AI has to learn, and they're not really good at it right now. It's just not at that point. So anyway, so volunteers analyze those images in detail, looking for signs of David's blue backpack. Gus and Richard used software supplied by Aero Scientific to conduct the survey. Aero Scientific flight planning software, or flight planner as it's called, and flight management systems called Avitrix were used to plan the flight runs over Idlewild and manage the camera systems throughout the flight. The aerial survey acquired 1,235 color images of the area at 4 inches each. So they're little bitty images. But at a 4-inch resolution. I'm sorry, 4-inch resolution. But they're still, I think, from what I understand, they're still fairly small. Though nothing of David's, sadly, was ever found. The volunteer team had some reason for optimism. In late of 2019 and again in early 2021, this technology found the remains of two other people in search they were searching for, which was Paul Miller, a Canadian who went missing in the Joshua Tree National Park in the summer of 2018, and Rosario Chata Garcia, a local woman with dementia who disappeared in July of 2020 after getting her car stuck on a rocky trail 40 miles from her home. Now let me show you, I'm going to show you a picture of David as well. So searchers are convinced David remains are out there just waiting for someone to find them and send them home to his parents. So let me pull this up real quick, guys, and then I'm going to get to your comments. Where are we at? All right, so David was hiking northbound or Nobo from Mexico to Canada on April 6th of 2017. He sent an email to his family from the Idlewild Library. O'Sullivan, who was from Ireland, intended to hike north into the San Jacinto Mountains the next day. He has not been seen since. There are several trails he could have taken to access the Pacific Coast Trail from Idlewild, and we do not know which trail David took. All right, let's go over here to comments. So let's see. I know everybody has been talking, and again, guys, if you've got questions, pop them in there. Let's see what everybody. Oh, wow, we got a bunch of people in here. All right, let's see. Oh, a bunch of them. Hold on, guys. All right, so let's see. So we've got Aki in the house. So she said, hello, Odd Mama. Hello. How are you? And I did inform everybody my silliness last week. Like I thought I was really going to have to get my eyes checked out. And it turns out I didn't have the brightness up enough. And so I couldn't see what everybody was saying. Silly me. And then Calvin, he says, hello, Odd Mama. Hello. How are you? And this is going to be a bit of a long one tonight, guys. And then we've got Cannabelle. Hello, Cannabelle. How are you? And then we've got John. Hello, John. Glad to see you in here. We've missed you. I think, were you here last time? Because I didn't see, well, of course, I didn't see anybody last time. So never mind. But I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so what Kisa's asking is about hikers that have been declared cold cases, is what we're talking about tonight. And I'll reiterate this when we finish, but the really unusual thing that caught my attention about this, and I'm sure the writer Angela Langford, that's the reason she wrote the book, is that in the 55 years since the Pacific Coast Trail has been there, and again, I know it wasn't completed till the 90s, but in the 55 years that it has been there, these are the only three that have not been found. And the really odd thing about it is too is if at least with two of them, if it did have something to do with like snow and ice, and I'm not saying necessarily like falling and getting hurt, but like hypothermia or something along those lines. Usually in cases like that, you're going to see the telltale signs of the paradoxal undressing, which is something that a lot of people will do when they start to suffer from severe hypothermia. And we kind of went over some of this stuff, plus lost person behavior, which is really odd with spatial displacement and stuff like that. So, guys, if you are not signed up for our cohort tier over there at Patreon, go over there and do it. This $5 tier, $5 a month. It helps us on the back end, but you're going to get these extended episodes that we're going to be doing later tonight. This will be an extended one. The really weird thing about paradoxal undressing is the fact that you're going to start feeling like you're on fire. And what that is it's in general terms, your core temperature goes down so low and your body is really trying to keep you warm that it flushes the system, your capillary system, with blood. But because your skin and the core temperature is so low, the capillaries basically explode, like they explode. And that's why sometimes you'll get like the little pink, like if you've been out in really, really cold weather for a long period of time, um, because you're starting to get, like, the very, 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 very beginnings of, like, frostbite and hypothermia. So, they haven't found anything, which is just really weird about this whole case. So, so let's see what we've got. I've got some other people here too. But there's Sven. Hey, Sven. He says, "Hi, my goblins. How are you?" And so John is saying that it sounds like David F. Sullivan was really not prepared. Um, I would call him an intermediate. Yeah. I don't think that he was probably prepared. He probably thought he was prepared, and I'm not saying that he was in bad shape. He just wasn't, like a normal, what you call like more of a professional athlete, as far as the different types of terrain and different types of weather and things like that that you will experience on this trail, and probably more so than the Appalachian Trail. So Fuller, Ray, he's just asking about Fuller Ridge and how steep it is. Yeah, I've seen pictures of it. There's some parts that, like, basically it's like a rounded section, as best as I can explain it, with the trail kind of down towards the bottom, so to speak, of that rounded section. But it apparently that area gets very, very slick, very, very slick when it snows and when it ices. Like when the sun comes out, melts the snow, and then it refreezes and turns into ice. All right, let's see who else we have here. Okay, so John is asking about when he got his pounds mixed up with kilos. So the way that I understand it, when you're going to do a through hike, um, and you have, like, there's specialized equipment you need. It's not the same thing as, like, going for a weekend camp. When you're doing a hike in, like a backcountry hike in, especially with a through hike, normally they say the most anyone should carry is between 15 to 20 pounds. 20 pounds is super heavy if you're doing a through hike like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Coast Trail or the Continental Divide Trail. They most people try to keep theirs, if I remember correctly, between 12 and 15 pounds. Now that's everything. That's your food, that's your tent, that's your sleeping bag, that's your sleeping mat, that's everything that you're taking with you should be anywhere from about 12 to 15 pounds. So, but he's saying basically he got his kilos and his pounds mixed up, and the items that he was carrying were just really too heavy for what he was doing, which was a long distance through hike. And then Keith is asking about self service. Well, they say now, like we talked about in the first episode, is that self service is like 75% of the Pacific Coast Trail now. But this was back in 2017. And so we're still talking about, like, some people probably still had flip phones, for goodness sake. But I do imagine that the likelihood of having self service everywhere would not have been, it would have been sparse, a lot sparser than it is now. But and that's the reason even today, they really advise that you carry a GPS tracker or that is enabled with an emergency beacon. Um, because it's a satellite service versus like cellular service. And Frank, hello Frank. Glad you're here. Yeah, it really is a sad story. It really, really is. And so let me just because we got a lot more to go. And God, we've already been here an hour. This is gonna be probably a 2 hour show, 3 hours with the Patreon. But I can hang in if you guys can hang in. And Mr. Gill says, "Hello, yeet." Let's see if there's anybody else I have not said hello to, and then we'll move on to the next hiker. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so let's go back to this. All right, so we've already talked about David O'Sullivan. Now, David O'Sullivan was in 2017. This is another case that caught the writer's attention because this was 2016. There are actually 3 years in a row, 17, 16, and 15. Now, Chris Fowler, 34, was last seen on October 12th of 2016 at the Cracker Barrel at White Pass in Washington State, where he stopped to get coffee before heading out to complete his hike or the last leg of the Pacific Coast Trail. His phone was shut off about an hour later and he was never seen again. In the spring of 2016, Chris Fowler began a 2,653-mile hike from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Coast Trail, also known as the PCT, a hike that would take him through vast deserts, wildernesses, majestic crests of the Cascades and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. But on October 12th, somewhere around White Pass in Washington State, with less than 400 miles left to go until he reached the end, Chris disappeared. Chris was an amateur photographer and was really there to take in the beauty around him, his mother Sally explained. So he would often move at his own pace, which would be slower, than a lot of other hikers. And he would also like take pictures along the way. And he was also given the trail name Sherpa. He had stopped off at a California town when two female hikers asked for directions. He obliged, and when they saw him again, they announced, "Hey, there's Sherpa," and the name stuck. At checkpoints along the trail, Chris would stop to charge his phone and check in with friends and family, sharing the experience and posting photos on social media. So when Chris disappeared in October, his mother, Sally, knew he hadn't just walked away. So when Chris disappeared, okay, so he hadn't just walked away. He didn't have anything to walk away from, his mother, Sally, said. Yes, he was at a crossroads in his life, which we talked about that. A lot of people that do this hike or the Appalachian Trail usually are at some sort of crossroads. And I don't mean like a bad crossroads. It could just be, like how some people will take a year off to travel after they get out of college or out of the high school. It's kind of the same concept. In this case, he had just come out of it was an amicable divorce. They didn't have any bad feelings. He was doing fine, and he you know wasn't under any kind of depression or anything like that. Um, he was basically what she's saying is he was content, and he would want to be found. He told me to come find him, and I tried. It was the end of October when Chris's parents realized they hadn't heard from their son in 3 weeks. They began calling Chris's cousins and friends and other hikers he had met along the trail, but no one had seen or heard from Chris since mid-October. Sally said the authorities told her that Chris may not want to be found and stressed that it is very easy to lose contact with someone on the trail. But Sally refused to accept those answers. She retraced her son's steps using the bank account records and his sign-ins at checkpoints where he had picked up packages. She finally traced him to Yamaka County and discovered that he never signed for his packages at the next checkpoint. And the really weird thing about it, and we're going to get into this, is the packages were gone. Like the area that he was supposed to get to, where he didn't sign in. And there's some debate about that. Some say it's on an honor system and they don't have sign in to pick up, their because what they'll do is they'll send themselves like food and different things like that as they progress up the trail. They'll stop at these little towns along the way. Now, Sergeant Randy Bisco with the Yamaka County Sheriff's Office told Dateline when he talked to them that he got a call from Sally on October 31st of 2016. Now, a big winter storm had already swept through the area, so Sergeant Bisco knew they needed to send out search crews immediately. According to the information gathered by Chris's parents and by Sergeant Briscoe, Chris had stopped in Packwood, Washington, to gather supplies for the next few days. On October 12th, like I said earlier, he was given a ride to the White Pass trailhead, where he was dropped off at a Cracker Barrel. Per Sergeant Briscoe, the clerk at the store saw him walk out of the store, and it's believed he was headed back to the trail. No one saw him after he left the store, and no one saw him on the trail that day, stated Sergeant Briscoe. He also added that most hikers had chosen to leave the trail ahead of the incoming storm or hitchhike around the pass in order to finish the last section of the trail into Canada. Sally, his mother, did state that Chris had tried to call his father that day, but his father had been at work and had missed the call. According to phone records later obtained by law enforcement, Chris's phone was shut off about an hour after he was seen leaving the store. Now, this is not unusual for hikers to turn off their phones or to put them on airplane mode to save their battery. But there was no more activity, however, on his phone after that. After Chris left the store in White Pass, it is believed he hiked headfirst into a storm that had developed from Typhoon Songda. It was a storm touted as the biggest storm to hit Washington in the last 15 to 20 years. He knew the storm was coming, and from what we gather from some of the people who last spoke with him, he was going back and forth on his decision on whether or not to forge ahead. And despite not having the proper winter weather gear, he was determined to finish the last 300 miles of his trail. Search and rescue teams from multiple agencies began a massive, grueling days-long search for the hiker by foot and by air. Volunteers scoured the trails between White Pass and Chinook Pass, while official search and rescue teams under the Yarmouth Sheriff's Department did an initial search along the PCT from White Pass, in addition to flyovers and road searches. After the initial search, they had focused primarily on the area around Blowout Mountain. Now, the reason they did this was they checked out this location was because of an unconfirmed sighting by two bear hunters in October of that year, who stated that they were at Blowout Mountain where they saw him. Now, I'm going to go a little bit more into this, but it turns out that this sighting is bogus. Like, to me, it's suspiciously bogus. But not really much ever came more of it, which was really weird. Now, Chris would awake on October 13th to freezing rain, in which some believe his clothing, if that was the case, that he decided to continue on the trail, that his clothing would quickly wet out, which basically means it gets really wet. And he succumbed to hypothermia within a 48-hour window. For this reason, some do not believe the bear hunter sighting that took place 10 days later by Blowout Mountain is legitimate. And here was the update. The bear hunters were found to have posted pictures of themselves at a football game on Facebook on the same day they claimed to be hunting and had their Chris sighting. The storm is the critical event, and this is the crux that has been overlooked time and time again. Given the severity of the storm, if Chris had made it to Highway 410 at Chinook Pass, 28 miles from where he started at White Pass, he would have pulled out and sought refuge in town because of the very cold and wet weather, which were what a lot of hikers were doing. Now, since he did not do so, some believe he is off trail somewhere between White Pass, which is milepost marker 2292, and Chinook Pass, which is mile marker 2320. It's a 28-mile section. But the problem is, how far off the trail is basically the question. Now, if you look at statistics will say that if a lost person is not found within 50 feet of the trail, they're more than likely going to be found within 2 miles of where they went missing. Now, many theories have circulated that the area in the area that since Chris disappeared. Some still believe that the 34-year-old just simply never wanted to be found. Others speculate there was an animal attack or that he was met with foul play on the trail. Sergeant Briscoe stated the most likely scenario, however, is that Chris was caught up in the storm, unprepared, and succumbed to hypothermia. But again, if that's the case, where's the paradoxical undressing? Where is the because even was it Julius Sands, the one that got lost and died when he was hiking? Like they found him a ridge over, but they found items before they found him. Like they had a pretty good idea that they were going to find a body in the spring when everything melted. But with him, nothing, just absolutely nothing, which is it's just kind of bizarre. Um, Now, like I said, Sergeant Briscoe does feel like hypothermia was what happened. Now he points out that Chris had been wearing Chaco sandals for the entire hike, but other hikers had stated back in part one that he had traversed snow several times and was very good. He was able to manage in the snow. Now Briscoe then explained what's unusual, though, however, even to him, is that none of Chris's supplies or belongings have ever been found. And he states, "We haven't found anything of his. We know that he had a pack with him and a tent that someone had given him on the trail. But this is a vast wilderness, and after that storm, Chris and his things could be out there buried under 20 to 30, buried for up to 20 to 30 years. So it could take anywhere from 20 to 30 years for him to show back up. And that's not unusual. I mean, look at some cases of Mount Rainier. Now, this is very close to Mount Rainier, is where he's at. And there are, if I understand correctly, there's still like either 40 something or 15 people still frozen up there on Mount Rainier. And they've been up there for a while. Now, he also said that after exhausting all land and air search options, crews suspended their active ground search, but are still actively working on Chris's case by working with volunteers and following up on any leads that may come in. We follow up every single lead that comes in, states Sergeant Briscoe, stating we even followed one all the way to South America, someone that was thought to have spotted Chris. And that's a really interesting story about the gentleman that was in Brazil, which did have a striking resemblance to Chris. And he was from Canada, and he had been missing for several years. So again, I would recommend that book. Now, an update. In 2019, a small hygiene bag was found during an official SAR search, which is search and rescue, which was buried in the mud, very hard to see. This item was found in Laughing Water Creek Trail, which is Notches Mountain, which is kind of the mountain area. It's close to Chinook, but like Chinook, think of Chinook over here. It's kind of off this way. And it's got a loop, like it's just a loop pipe. And so could he have gotten lost? Could he got it, kind of disoriented and went thinking he was headed to Chinook and went out towards Laughing Creek Trail and Notches Mountain? To me, if you look kind of at the area, I think it would be possible, especially if the snow was really, really deep. And there are cabins out there. In the they've got like a kind of a camp where you can hike in and camp out there. So that's where they found this small hygiene bag. Now, searchers couldn't confirm 100% that it belonged to Chris, but they couldn't dismiss it either. SARS agrees that it can't be ruled out. The bag had to be dug out of the mud, and it was in bad shape. It contained toothpaste, a toothbrush, a lighter, some powdered Gatorade, like in a little baggie, and a few other items. All items known Chris had, as well as other hikers. Yes, that is true. The bag has an orange logo on it for outdoor research, which orange was Chris's favorite color. They made this bag specifically between 2015, and they quit making it in late 2016. All the items had 2016 expiration dates, which do line up with what Chris would have had if, if these were his items. The expiration dates do match. Now officials have been back to the area to search it twice as well. And if it is Chris's bag, we know he made it at least that far. But again, that's kind of over in that direction based on the map I was looking at where Chinook Pass is kind of over here. So he did, if that is his, he did get further than White Pass than they thought, but it was kind of more easterly than westerly based on the map that I was looking at. Now, unfortunately, there were no fingerprints to get, as those can disappear from older items, and same with like touch DNA, things like that. It's just there wasn't really anything that they could do, even with the toothbrush, because it had been in the water and the mud for so long. I'm assuming that the bag inside of that hygiene bag had been compromised. So there wasn't really a whole lot that they could have done with that. So let me show you. I mean, basically, that's just kind of where it got left. I mean, they don't know what happened to him. The only thing that they have found is that this hygiene bag may be his. Um, and that would kind of, I guess, make sense if it is his, that either A, if he did get lost and succumb to some sort of injuries or hypothermia or something like that, maybe he fell into a creek or something, and that was just a proportion of his items that washed away, even though you would think they would have washed the other direction. But again, I don't know which way the water is moving in that area. Um, it could have been a case like that, or he could have been going the wrong direction, or he could have maybe been trying to make it to those cabins and things that were out there. I don't really know, but they have found nothing of his. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you a picture of him, and then we'll get to the comments real quick. All right, so Chris Fowler was completing his NOBO, which is now northbound, through hike in Washington on October 12th of 2016. He was dropped off near the trailhead at White Pass or Packwood. His last cell phone ping was in that area around 5 p.m. Considerable amounts of snow and rain were expected over the next few days. The authorities and volunteers have diligently searched much of the trail between White Pass and the Canadian border. Yet Chris Fowler still is missing. They haven't found anything of his. So just a really sad thing. A really, really sad thing. All right, so let's get to some of the comments real quick, and then we're going to hop into this next one. So John was saying he got stuck in a snowbank that was near like a really sounds like a dangerous area. So yeah, that sounds scary. That sounds scary. I remember, and I know you guys from up north will probably laugh at me, but back in the mid '90s, we had a true for real snowstorm down here, and the snow was up to my knees, which that's a big deal in Georgia, especially not northern Georgia, but more like mid Georgia. And I remember because the house that we were living at the time, and of course all the electricity, the power had gone out and everything. We had a wood burning stove, and I remember having to try to walk out in those conditions where you couldn't even see the pile of logs that we had because the snow was blowing so hard and the snow was literally up to my knees. It's a lot harder to walk in that stuff than you think it would be. And it's so cold out there, you almost feel like you can't get your breath. It was the oddest sensation I'd ever had in my life. I mean, to be a southerner, to be down here to where we freak out when there's like a half an inch of snow on the ground. But so I really understand what you're saying, John. And then, John is talking about Mount Everest. Yeah, there's still a lot of folks up there. There's still a lot of folks up there. Kinda spooky. Alright, I think I've got everybody covered. Okay. Alright. Okay. So let's get on to, the last. So in early of and this is a really weird one. This is a really weird one. So put on your detective hats and see what you can make of this, because this one is odd. Now, in early 2015, Chris Silva was at a bit of a crossroads, and we discussed that a little bit in part one. He had just broken up with his girlfriend, and he decided to take a few days hike to hike a section of the PCT by himself, and just basically spend some time with his thoughts and clearing his head. Sylvia, 28, left Anaz Borgio on February 12th to hike the Pacific Crest Trail south to Campo. So he was going Sobo. He was going southbound for just a section of the trail. He was doing a section hike. On February 16th, he called a friend and asked to be picked up the next day at the Buddhist temple in the Chihuahua Valley, or on Chihuahua Valley Road. Silva did not make it to his rendezvous point. On February 20th, another hiker found Sylvia's gear laid out along the Pacific Coast Trail near mile marker 127, not far from, it's kind of a, I don't know if hostile would be the way to really describe it, um, but kind of a hostile area, as far as like a place to lay your head at night, and that place goes by the name of like Mike's Place. Now, on February 24th, when Chris didn't show up at the planned area, or the planned on March 24th, because Chris did not show up for that planned rendezvous point, his roommate and friend Min Kim reported him missing. Dedicated teams meticulously combed the vicinity of the Buddhist temple where Chris's belongings were discovered. Well, it was near the Buddhist temple, and other sections of the Pacific Crest Trail where he may have been hiking. The search involved helicopter flyovers, canine units, and ground teams, yet Chris has not been located. Furthermore, law enforcement officials conducted thorough interviews with family members, friends, and individuals who had contact with Chris prior to his disappearance. On February 20th of 2015, 4 days after the call between Chris and Min, a gentleman by the name of Eric Trockman hiked north from Warner Springs. 18 miles later, he came across something what he considered a little peculiar: another hiker's stuff. So we're talking about Chris Silva's items that were just left on the side of the trail. It was a yellow and silver ground pad, a blue sleeping bag, a backpack, a tarp, and a pair of trekking poles. All were lying next to the trail, as if the owner might return at any moment. Brockman assumed the hiker must be out looking for water, or going to the bathroom, or trying to find cell service. But just in case there was more to it than that, he snapped a picture of the gear with his phone. The photo recorded the time and date of this fateful encounter: February 20th, 2015, 2:15 p.m. After he got home, Trockman logged on to the online PCT class of 2015. And basically what that is each year, people that make the through hike, whether it be the Appalachian Trail or Pacific Coast Trail or what have you, they have kind of like a graduating class group. And at the time, the Facebook group were really big when it came to that. So he logged on to the Pacific Coast Trail class of 2015, which was a Facebook group of about 3,000 members that consisted of that year's through hikers, as well as their fans. On the 25th, however, Trockman read an unsettling post that reminded him of the abandoned gear he had seen a few days earlier. A 2015 Pacific Crest hiker had gone missing. The lost man was 28, the same age as Trockman, and he disappeared from the same section Eric had hiked, except Chris Silva had walked in the opposite direction. Trockman shared the photo of the abandoned gear in the Facebook thread and provided his name and phone number to search and rescue. But no one interviewed him about what he had found until 2 years later. Why was he going alone? That was very unusual, Nancy, Chris Silva's mother said, especially when they found his gear. He would not have left his gear. Now, a lot of people, again, yes, he was in sort of a crossroads. There is some concern that there may have been depression and things like that. A lot of people say he was in good spirits. He was just trying to find his way. Some said he was really more at what we think of as a crossroads and had been battling with depression. The thing about it is, and we're going to kind of get into what the area looks like, if this was a suicide, and trigger warning, I'm about to talk about suicide. If this was a suicide, normally, normal behavior when it comes to that, and it comes to a situation where you're outdoors and you decide to do this, you're not going to beat feet through brush with briars and different things like that. Normally, someone that is looking to do this is looking for a place that is out of sight, but not hard to get to. Does that make sense? Um, and all the areas to where, I mean, if you wanted to do the whole Lover's Leap thing, there were like ravine areas down below this area that would have been like, you would have been found. You would have been found very easily. And they searched all those areas. And so as far as like a suicide idea, I don't know so much, honestly. I really don't. I don't think he was at that point mentally as far as wanting to, like unalive himself or anything. And plus just the area where his gear was located, it was just not the area to do that. I mean, you would have to beat brush and bushwhack for like 15 minutes to get to a clearing. And we're talking about like thorny brush, scrubby, you'd just be covered up with scratches and stuff. So that really, I don't think that would be the case. Now, excuse me, trail check-in logs confirm, however, that mountain lions were active in the area the day that Chris went missing. Now, I'm going to take an excerpt from Trail of the Lost by Andrea Langford. And this is what she writes about that. Walking uphill through the scrub to the peak under dozens of granite boulders ranked 7 out of 10 in terms of painful and aggravating. What kind of person would spend more than 15 minutes pushing through the brittle chamise and eye-poking shrubs to reach the top of this ridge? An escaped fugitive, maybe, trying to avoid cops and hounds? Possibly. A suicidal man looking for a cliff? I doubt it. A bored young man wanting to pass away the time while waiting for a ride? No way. Pushing through the brush on these ridges was so horrendous, I concluded that neither mountain lion nor maniac could drag a hiker's body 10 yards through this crap without leaving behind a boatload of evidence. And again, that's not in line with someone that's looking to off themselves, to have to deal with that kind of brush and stuff. Now, what we do know is that the Sylvia gear site was not a camping spot. With its lack of shade, rocky surface, and awkward angle, it wasn't even a tempting location for a long break. However, interestingly though, his toiletry bag was one of the items they believe is missing. What the site did offer, however, was a good view of the Chihuahua Valley Road. You could watch a vehicle coming from a mile or more and have time to fast walk back to the trail before the car passed. To the east is the Anza Borrego Desert, which stretches out below the PCT. It meanders high above ridges covered with shrubs typical of California chaparral, which is a semi-arid landscape of chamise and mazidia that grows thick and scratchy, but rarely higher than your head. Now, southward on that trail, a 5-minute walk from the gear site was a handmade sign welcoming hikers to a hostel known as Mike's Place. Now, years ago, Mike Herrera bought a patch of land on an isolated ridge east of the PCT and built himself basically a getaway. He was a big fan of the trails and its hikers. Herrera invited the travelers to fill up their canteens from a water tank on his property. He also encouraged them to camp on his home site. This act of charity had earned Mike the title of Trail Angel, and we talked about that in part one. A generous person, basically, who supports through hikers' journeys in various ways, such as giving them free rides, food, lodging, things like that. Up to 100 backpackers visited the hostel each day during the peak hike season. To handle the demand, Herrera had hired caretakers to live at the compound. His hospitality was real, but his hostel, however, did have a mixed reputation, causing some to avoid it, stating it really had too much of a party atmosphere. However, Mike's place was unmanned during the period of time where Chris would have been hiking on the Pacific Coast Trail. As far as the trail logs go, there were no entries from January 6th to February 17th. A through hiker by the name of Big Dog Cruxon signed the register with no commentary. Another named Hatchet did sign with a warning about mountain lions. Now, Morgan Clements, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him later in the expanded episode. Morgan Clements, a map maker, who was helping with the David O'Sullivan case at the time, helped to identify and locate contact information on these two hikers and some other hikers that had entries in the registry for both before and after Chris Silva disappeared. Now, the hikers, they got in touch with two of them. Both confirmed there were no caretakers at Mike's place in February of 2015 and that weather was clear and that water and shelter, however, was still available. Even though it wasn't manned, there were still like campers and different things like that that you could spend the night in. As well as that Chris's gear was still on the trail, but not seen by anyone between the evening of February 17th to early February 24th. Now, Jeffrey Hatchet Lewis, which is Hatchet, had also spotted Chris's gear. So there's a couple of people that are seeing the gear. One guy takes a picture of it. Jeffrey Hatchet actually spots it and winds up retrieving it. Now, both he and another through hiker stayed at Mike's place for 3 nights before really looking at the gear itself. They found an identification card for Chris Silva and a seed packet in one of the pockets of the gear, leading Hatchet to think that Chris, in fact, had stayed at Mike's place in the same camper that he had because there were several of those same packets lying around within the camper. So, it's just kind of an easy assumption that Chris maybe did wind up at least going in that camper, most likely spending the night in it at least one night. Now, to protect this gear that they had found from the rain, they carried Chris's gear back to Mike's place. At this time, seeing an officer who was trying to get a radio signal, they called in the information. A SARS team was assembled at Mike's place, turning it into a command post. Over the next few days, nearly 50 searchers from San Diego, as well as other rescue units and U.S. Border Patrol, searched for Chris Silva. Even scent dogs searched everywhere, but nothing was found. Hatchet was interviewed by the police, but was ruled out as any type of suspect. However, Hatchet did remember seeing items in the hiker's box at Mike's place. And let me explain what a hiker's box is. So at different, like if you take the Appalachian Trail, just as an instance, you may not come to a town, but you'll come to a shelter. And that's like you can camp pretty much wherever you want to, but it's like a designated place, like a wooden lean-to type thing to where you can actually camp. Some of them look more like cabins. And several people, will camp in the same, shelter at the same time. And usually in these areas, they'll have like a box, and it's just like, I don't know, say one of your trekking poles broke, and you had ordered another pair of trekking poles. So you throw that extra trekking pole that's not broken, you throw it into a hiker's box. And there's all kinds of things that are thrown in there from, like water bladders that you can use to drink, and canteens and hiking poles, sleeping bags, you name it, all kinds of crap is thrown into these boxes. And so this, you can go through a hiker's box when you get to an area where there is one, and whatever's in there, you can take it if you need it. So the thing that Hatchet remembers is that he did remember seeing items in the hiker's spot at Mike's place, including a pair of digital camouflage pants, which were like the ones that Chris Silver was wearing at the time of his disappearance, as well as a paperback novel by the name of Siddhartha. Now, these items match Chris' belongings, and Chris's friend Min confirmed he had purchased a copy of Siddhartha for Chris to read on the trail. Now, the central theme of Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse is the journey of self-discovery and the search for enlightenment. The novel explores the ideas that true understanding and wisdom can only be attained through a deep and personal experience of life, rather than through external teachings or practices. Siddhartha's journey is marked by his encounters with various teachers and teachings, including the historical Buddha. However, Siddhartha ultimately comes to the realization that enlightenment cannot be found through external means, but rather through a deeper understanding of one's own inner self. This understanding is depicted in the novel as a process of self-transformation in which Siddhartha sheds his old beliefs and ways of thinking and undergoes a profound spiritual awakening. Now, keep that in mind. The novel also explores themes of impermanence, suffering, and the interconnectedness of all things, which are central to many Eastern spiritual traditions. Through Siddhartha's journey, the reader is invited to reflect on their own understanding of life and the search for meaning and fulfillment. In the book Siddhartha, the story follows, like I said, the journey of the protagonist, which is Siddhartha, as he seeks enlightenment and meaning in life. The ending of the book reveals, however, that Siddhartha ultimately has a realization and attainment of enlightenment. Here are some key points as far as what kind of encompasses what the book is about. Now, Siddhartha spends many years studying the river and learning its secrets from Vasudeva, the ferryman. Through his contemplation of the river, Siddhartha has a revelation about the interconnectedness of all life and the cynical nature of existence. Siddhartha learns that birth and death, joy and sorrow, good and evil are all part of the timeless unity. After Siddhartha has absorbed all the lessons from the river, Vasudeva announces that he is retiring and leave Siddhartha to now be the ferryman. The novel ends with Govinda, Siddhartha's childhood friend, seeking enlightenment and meeting a wise man who lives by the river. Govinda does not recognize that the wise man is Siddhartha himself. Siddhartha imparts his wisdom to Godiva, explaining that for every true statement, there is an opposite one that is also so, or true. He emphasizes the completeness of the world and urges people to love and accept it in its entirety. Siddhartha asks Godiva to kiss his forehead, and in doing so, Godiva experiences the visions of timelessness and Siddhartha himself had seen by the river. Siddhartha smiles radiantly, having found enlightenment. So basically, the ending of Siddhartha portrays Siddhartha's journey of self-discovery and his ultimate realization of the interconnectedness and completeness of life. Now, Min, his friend, hearing that Chris's book may still be out there, posts the cover and inquiry on two different Pacific Coast Trail Class of 2015 Facebook groups concerning the book Siddhartha that Chris was carrying. Jordan Babb, a 2015 Pacific Coast Trail hiker, shared that a friend had given him the book from an Acton KOA hiker box, which was over 150 miles north of Chihuahua Valley, and that he had carried it with himself through the remainder of his through hike and surprisingly still had it. It does turn out that this book is in fact Chris Silva's. But unfortunately, it's been handled so much, there's not a whole lot that they can do at this point as far as DNA. So I'm gonna go over I'm gonna show you a picture of Chris Silva. Um, Let me get over to this area, and then we're going to be moving soon over to the patron to finish up. Let's see what we got. Hold on. Here we go. So here's Chris Silva. Silva was hiking southbound from Anaz to Campo. He left on February 12th of 2015. On February 16th, he called a friend and asked to be picked up the next day at the Buddhist temple on Chihuahua Valley Road. Silva did not make it to his rendezvous point. On February 20th, another hiker found Sylvia's gear laid out alongside the Pacific Coast Trail near mile marker 127, not far from Mike's place. Despite a large search effort, Chris Silva is still missing. Now, through all this sadness and these three going missing, there has been some positive that has happened because of everything involved with these three. Um, and there was a lot of people that I didn't bring into this because it would just be really too long. And you really need to read the book if you because it's got so much in it that I just can't cover. But basically, a lot of the searchers, the parents, people that were involved in trying to locate, either Fowler, O'Sullivan, or Silva, they wound up coming together and forming the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation. It was created in honor of Chris Fowler and David O'Sullivan and was created to help families of missing hikers navigate through the very difficult process of searching for loved ones. Now, their mission statement with safety and compassion is our core principle. The Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation provides assistance to families of missing hikers, connects them to vetted resources, facilitates searches on their behalf once official efforts have been suspended, and supports initiatives to prevent further missing hiker cases. So they really have upped the safety concerns and kind of really getting the information out there to hikers on what to look for, how to be safe, that kind of thing. Now there is a term a term seasoned trail experts use, and that is called hiker track. This refers to how the uninitiated often confuse weather-beaten, disheveled through hikers with more worrisome types like ne'er-do-wells, escaped convicts, and yes, that does happen, and meth addicts. Not unlike separating a poisonous mushroom from a batch of edible ones. But as experienced hikers will tell you, tiny details can help you distinguish friend from foe when on the trail. Here's a hint. Pay close attention to the things they carry. Also, the sunny skies and isolation along the sections of the Pacific Coast Trail has attracted a specific category of farmer. Guys who grew illicit crops or who grow illicit crops and had business practices that often turn violent. So did Chris Silva become a victim of violence? Or is there another possible explanation or scenario? Did Chris Silva fall victim to a cult and simply walk away? Now, if you'll come on over to Patreon, we're going to go into what I call the Yellow Deli connection, plus a whole lot more. We're going to go into some of these other cases that some of these searchers have helped to locate. Now, marijuana propagation were not the only types of farmers one might meet on the PCT trail. So far as like cannabis growers, and a lot of times they would be armed. And if you found yourself, in their midst, there's a likelihood you could be shot and buried somewhere, and they would never find you. So, but yeah, so go ahead and join us over at the patron, at the cohort level, and we're going to go into the Yellow Deli connection again, as well as some other ones. And I really do appreciate you guys hanging with me. This was a really long one, but there was just so much information, and I wanted to make sure that I covered it well because this is still ongoing. So I didn't want it to be disrespectful to the family. So yeah, so meet me over there at Patron, and we will see you Friday after next. Bye, guys. Pleasant nightmares.